3 technology talks in a row without the use of PowerPoint. What are the odds? What are the odds? I have to apologize for everybody. I have like the worst cold in the world, and I'm actually high on Lemsip right now. So if it starts to get a little bit weird, just bear with me. As Rory says, I do lots and lots of things. I suppose the general thread through all of my jobs is that I predict long-term trends and the effects of technology on modern life. And of course, you know, as Nick has said and as Alex has sort of alluded to, predicting the future is pretty much futile. As a futurist, as a professional futurist, I'm telling you that I'm absolutely 100% full of shit. I mean, it's completely nonsense. In fact, you know, it's long been said by science fiction writers that if they if in the past they had gone to their editors and pitched a book based on today's technologies, the security would have been called. I mean, it's madness, the sort of things that we have today. We don't have the flying cars, but we do have slabs of black glass on which we can access all of the world's information and locate ourselves in the universe to within 3 inches. So we have these sort of new and weird, miraculous technologies that have occurred, and we also seem to be passing milestones all the time. This week, for example, we saw the 10 millionth British Twitter user, and much to the media's chagrin, now far more people read Twitter in the UK than read a newspaper. Now, I wouldn't actually say that's due to an outbreak of neophilia or a sort of a love of the internet, but really actually to do with a slow failing of national institutions, which I'm going to get to in a second. So what I'd like to talk about today really are three major trends which come from the internet and come from these digital technologies that are going to lead us into the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, and the hope that by the time they don't come true, you won't be around to tell me that I was wrong. And then maybe I'll give you a little bit of advice at the end to talk about what you might do about it. The first macro trend is the good old one of Moore's law. Now, for those of you in the room, the 3 of you in the room who don't know what Moore's law is, can't quite remember, I'm going to fill you in. In 1958, I believe it was, the co-founder of Intel, the people who make integrated circuits and microchips, a guy called Gordon Moore, he looked at the number of components that were on an integrated circuit over the years, and he realized that the number of components on a chip for the same price roughly doubled every year to 18 months. Or conversely, the price of a chip of a certain amount of power halved every year to 18 months. And he said, oh, this is really interesting. I think this will become a trend that will continue. And it turns out that it did, and it's generally thought to be probably going to continue for the next 20 or 30 years. Now, this has very, very important ramifications for pretty much everything, and certainly for the rest of your lives. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're David Cameron. When you entered Downing Street last year, you had an iPhone 3GS in your pocket. I don't know if that is true. Let's just imagine this. iPhone 3GS in your pocket. At the time, it was a miracle piece of technology. If you can remember back into the prehistory when the 3GS came out, it was considered to be an astounding piece of gear. Let's assume that Cameron gets re-elected in the next election. He's a 2-term prime minister. At the end of his reign as Prime Minister, he will probably have an iPhone 10 in his pocket. The iPhone 10 will cost the same amount as the iPhone 3GS, but it will be 64 times as powerful. An iPhone 3GS equivalent, now don't forget a year ago that was considered to be a miraculous piece of technology, an iPhone 3GS will cost 1/64th of what it costs today. It will effectively be free with a packet of cornflakes. The exponential growth of technology makes long-term planning really, really hard. This is the Royal Geographical Society, and if you're the Royal Geographical Society, you know, a diplomat or somebody like that. Imagine you're a diplomat. Let's take that one. You know, you leave Cambridge with your politics degree, and you go into the Foreign Office at the age of 20, 21. If you're really good, by the time you're 40, 42, you become an ambassador, if you're really, really, really good. The computer on your desk when you're made ambassador will be 8,000 times as powerful as the one that you had on your desk when you started out. Or equivalently, you could buy 8,000 of the computers that you had on your desk before. You can extrapolate that as much as you like. This has some really interesting results. One quite good one. If you've got a project that requires about 6 years' worth of mathematics, and I know many people in the room do, If you have 6 years worth of mathematics, the most efficient way of doing it is to go on holiday for a year. If you go on holiday for a year and then buy your computers, the computers you then buy will only take 3 years to do the sum. So 1 year on the beach plus 3 years means you finish in 4 years, and not the 6 years you would have taken if you'd started the year before. So actually, sweet. You could probably take 2 years out, but I hadn't done the maths on that yet. And now I'm standing here, I'm thinking, yeah, so you know. Now, the effect of this is that anything that can be replaced by an algorithm will be. Anything that you do that can be replaced by a smart computer, you're in trouble. Rule number 1. We have already seen this happen in the city. 90% to 95% of all equity trades and bond trades are made by artificial intelligences, not by people. Which leads us on to rule number 2. These algorithms that we're talking about will not be understandable. One on its own might be understandable by the person who writes it, but get 2 or 3 in a room together, or get a couple of thousand, or tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands working on, say, the global financial markets. And as we've found over the past few years, nobody can understand what's going on. We have this strange paradox that the more information that we have, the more capabilities that we have to process that information, the more confusing the world is. Moore's law has a corollary, which is called Hammersley's law. I don't know what it's named after. But Hammersley's law says that weirdness doubles every year to 18 months. It's been like that for quite a while. The third thing that you're going to get from Moore's law is that if you can think of it, but you've dismissed it because right now it's not very good, it's going to happen and it's going to outdo you. Kodak made this fundamental error a few years ago. Kodak looked at digital photography. In fact, they invented digital photography, but it was rubbish. And so they said, well, it's fine, we'll continue to make transparency film because that's fantastic. And Kodak went out of business the same week that Instagram was bought for $1 billion. If it exists today, but you're dismissing it because it's a bit rubbish, in 3 or 4 years' time, it's going to be amazing. Fundamental problem. That means that the third world can leapfrog industrialized nations because they don't have this legacy of failure behind them. They can just buy the new stuff straight out. And the final point that comes from Moore's law is the famous old quote that sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That has 2 interesting implications. The first one is that it causes fear. If you see a miraculous technology, if it's miraculous or magical to you, it's because you don't understand it. And not understanding a technology causes fear. And this is why we have the subject we're not allowed to talk about this evening of the Daily Mail and Facebook. But magic is a very good word to use because magic is really a reframing of reality. If I was to make Alex disappear using the power of my mind, it would be very entertaining. I mean, it would be very entertaining for 2 reasons. Let's go with Nick. If I was to make Nick disappear, it would be very entertaining for 2 reasons. The first one would be the main reason would be the mismatch, the tension between what you know to be true, as in there's no possible way that I can make either of them disappear using the power of my mind. I've got a cold, for one thing. But what would apparently be true in that they would no longer be here. The reframing is the enjoyable bit. It's the bit that freaks us out, makes us laugh, or whatever. Information technology, and especially Moore's law-driven information technology, growing at an exponential rate, has introduced into society a collection of mutually opposing frames to understand the world by. And these ways of understanding the world not only oppose each other, but they actually make it impossible for the holder of one framework to understand how the holder of the other framework could possibly believe that thing. Now, there are lots of these and political ones, but I think the major one is age-based. Now, as people who come to RGS lectures, this is a generalization which does not apply to you lovely people. But in general, in general, society, especially in the West, seems to be splitting itself into two groups. People who did the majority of their intellectual development before 1989, and those who did the majority of their intellectual development after 1989. 1989 is the end of the Cold War, 1990, the reunification of Germany, and on Christmas Day, the turning on of the first web server. That was really the birth of the modern era. I was in, as an aside, I was in Brazil last year, and I had a very nice dinner with Brazil's premier Lacanian psychotherapist. He was the guy who introduced Lacanian psychotherapy to Brazil, and he was President Lula's personal counselor, and he had a magnificent beard, and all of the waiters knew him, and it was a spectacular thing. And very nice man, and he said, you know, Ben, I'm not going to do his accent. He said, Ben, 20 years ago, all of my clients would have been 20-year-old young men who could not deal with their relationship with their parents. He said, but now, all of my clients are 65-year-old men who can't deal with their relationship with their children. And the reason is because their children had grown up in this networked, non-hierarchical, digital, web-based, social network-driven universe. They have completely different social values. These values may well be driven, as Alex says, by the corporate values of the people running the net, but they're also driven by the architectural fundamentals of the internet. Let's talk about those architectural fundamentals, the second macro trend, which is the weirdness of the nation state. I was just made a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and this is my first talk here since then, and I feel really sad to be saying this, but the nation state is going away. I hope I'm going to get struck by lightning when I leave. Whereas 300 or 400 years ago, we would have a set of allegiances based around our local community, and that community will be defined by its geographical place in the world. What we're finding now are these multiplicity of networks, which admittedly didn't start with the internet. They started, you know, with the Enlightenment and so on, certainly with Gutenberg. But what we're finding is that we have allegiances which are not geographically based. We have cultural allegiances. We have philosophical allegiances. We have time zone allegiances, perhaps. Plenty of people in London live on West Coast time or New York time. We might have allegiances to our friends on Facebook more than we have allegiances with our neighbours. Certainly the case in London. And this produces a very interesting question for the future of geography, really, and for the future of public policy. Long-term stability, national stability and growth and all of that sort of thing depends on social and cultural interconnectedness. If we don't know each other, we hate each other, the country's going to go to hell in a handbasket very quickly. But what we're learning in this modern age is that those allegiances are different than patriotism. They're different from geographical-based allegiances. Instead, they're based around memetics. They're based around ideas. They might be religious. They might be political. You know, they might be revolutionary, like Occupy or Anonymous. Or they might be cultural or music or fashion-based. They might be political, like Greenpeace or something like that. But whereas politicians would say that we are no longer political animals, what I would say is that we are actually far more political than we ever have been before. We're just not political in the old style. We're kind of ignoring the nation state. We're ignoring Westminster. And this is causing a lot of fuss. National governments see the internet as a threat. They see it as a threat because it seems to be taking away a lot of their purpose in life. The internet, however, doesn't see national government at all. The internet sees national government in the way that Wikipedia saw Encyclopedia Britannica. Kind of this wreckage on somewhere back there that it kind of remembered once. The neoliberal project at the moment that Western governments seem to be going through, which is devolving everything to a local level, also has an issue and then having the network and the financial markets suck everything from the top, is leaving a big gap in the middle, which is being ignored. So the internet and these flows of data and so on are creating a situation where nation states, the Westphalian system, is ceasing to be relevant. I'm sorry, RGS. Which leads me very quickly to the final third thing. From statecraft to inner statecraft, to use a phrase that's not working. As Nick said, a lot of companies, Bain, for example, is running running a series where they're starting to turn off the email servers in the evenings. Because we're starting to learn 10 or 15 or 20 years into the communications revolutions for individuals that the usage of these communications tools needs to be reassessed on a personal basis. In the same way as we've seen the digital networks change the potency of the nation state, we're starting to see these digital tools really interfere with our own inner lives. Many people here will right now have a fundamental physical sensation of how many unread emails you have in your inbox. And will be freaking out a little bit that you've got your phone turned off. This is a bad thing. And so, as we've all been saying, my next bit of research is on what the internet does to our inner lives. And as we grow into sophistication, into the third decade of the popular web, I think the most important thing is we really and genuinely reassess what these tools are doing to our way of living. And to have these conversations that the three of us have been alluding to with each other about whether or not the values that are embodied in the technology are the values that we wish to have in our lives. And the tension between the two, I think, will define the next few years of the second decade of the 21st century. I hope you've got some good questions. Thank you very much.